All right, before we get painting on our sword, we want to make sure that everything looks good to us. So as I was looking at this between lectures, I thought that the sword looked a little bit too skinny, and I thought this bottom part of the sword looks too big. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first transform this layer that my blade is on, and I'm just going to stretch it out like so, and holding down Alt while I do that, that's going to stretch it out on both sides. So I'm going to stretch it out to about there should be good. Maybe one more. Let's see how that looks. All right, that looks good. Let's hit enter. Then I'm going to shrink my handle down and my bud down too. So I'm going to go find those layers. So let's see. There's one of them, and then that one, and that one. So I'm going to select all of those, turn my transform tool on, and hold down Shift and Alt at the same time to shrink it from the middle and also shrink it in proportion. So I'll shrink it to right about there should be good. And I'm going to stretch it up like so because I want my handle to still be as long as it was before. And I might drag that down a little bit. All right, great. Let's hit enter. Perfect. I like that shape much better. Now let's go ahead and get painting. So we're going to start with the butt of the sword. So I'm going to go find my bottom layer for that, which is that guy. And I'll add a new layer above that. And then I'm going to right click and turn that into a clipping layer mask. Then I can go ahead and zoom in there and begin to paint. So I'm going to grab the color white because our metal is going to be completely silver. And so we're going to use white as our base highlight color. Then I'm going to bring my brush opacity down to 20%, and then I'll begin painting. So I'm going to start by adding a highlight to this top area like so, because the light would probably be hitting it and we'd be seeing just the very ledge of that. Then I'm going to go ahead and add another layer on top of that like so to really start bringing in that silver color. And what we want to do from here is, since this is going to be cylinder shaped, we want the highlight to be in the middle to be the brightest, and the further out it goes, it needs to get darker. So I'll start out here like so, coming right up to that edge, but leaving a little bit of a dark area on the edge. And then I'm going to add another one a little bit further in, and I'll keep doing this. And if you miss a few spots like I did back there, that's fine. That's just going to add more texture to your artwork. Now we want to keep doing this until this middle area is basically as white as it can be. And we can add a little bit more on that outer edge area. So just like so. Now I think I got that outer edge area a little bit too dark. So I'm going to go ahead and select my dark gray and paint a little bit of that back in. And then I might add a little bit of a shadow down here and a little bit of texture, just because it may be reflecting the top surface of this piece of metal. So that's why we're adding that in. Then let's go ahead and reselect our white, and we're going to repaint in this top area like so. Perfect. Now let's move down to the bottom area. So I'm going to add some paint in like so, and then I'll add a little bit more in like so. And then there's going to be a little bit of a shadow being cast from this large piece of metal on top of it. So I'm going to start adding paint in right in the middle like so. So we're not going to have a shadow on this bottom part because as it turns into the bottom, it's going to create a little bit more of a shadow, and we're also going to have less light underneath here, like I said, because there's going to be a cast shadow. So that's why we're only painting through this middle area. And then we want to start painting in the center only and really start making that white. Great. Now I got these edges a little bit too light again, so I'm going to go ahead and select my dark gray color and start painting that in. Next, what I want to do is I want to grab a darker version of this gray. So I'll come down to about there, and I'm going to add a little bit more shadow underneath here. Now we're going to add a little bit of rust to our sword. So I'm going to come into my colors, and we're first going to start off with sort of an orangish red color, and we're going to make it really bright. So somewhere in there. We'll hit OK. Then using our brush tool and still being at 20% opacity, we're going to go ahead and start painting in this bottom area like so. So that's our first layer of the rust color. Now let's go ahead and switch back in there, and let's come a little bit more towards the yellowish oranges, and we're going to bring this down a little bit darker and a little bit more saturated. Hit OK. And then we're going to brush a little bit more of that in. And then lastly, we're going to grab an even darker version of that. So somewhere way over here, more saturated and way more darker. Then I'm going to bring my brush opacity up to 80%. And I'm going to go ahead and paint in some small spots down here like so. And that brown might be a little bit too dark, so I'm going to lighten that a little bit more to about there. And then we'll paint that in. Cool. So that just adds a little bit more texture and something a little bit more interesting to look at when you look at the sword. It gives it a lot more character. Now let's go ahead and move on to this part of the sword. So I'm going to come up to that layer, which is this one right here, and I'll add a new layer above that, right click, and create clipping mask. Then I'm going to switch back over to my white color, and then we'll start off with this top part. So we'll add a highlight across there. And then we can go ahead and start adding in this center area. So the more interesting brush strokes you can do and the more squiggly it looks and whatever, the more interesting your painting is going to look. So I do suggest that you try to keep it relatively messy, even though you still want it to look realistic. You also want it to have that painting style. So it's okay if you keep it pretty messy.